The dust-covered stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Carlin, Nevada depot, and Penelope Bradford's heart hammered so hard she feared it might crack her ribs. Through the smeared window, she could see him, the man whose letters had carried her across a continent, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun of late September 1882. She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, where the secret she carried felt heavier than all her earthly possessions combined. In 3 months of correspondence, Thomas Northwood had painted pictures of a ranch that needed a woman's touch, of vast Nevada skies and a home where love could grow like wildflowers after spring rain. But she had deceived him, and the weight of that deception made her hands shake as she gathered her carpetbag. The driver opened the door, and the dry heat hit her face like a physical force. Nevada in autumn still burned hot, so different from the cool Pennsylvania valleys where she had grown up. Penelope stepped down carefully, her traveling dress already feeling too heavy, too Eastern, too much like armor she no longer needed. Thomas moved toward her, removing his hat, and she saw his face clearly for the first time, strong-jawed and weathered by sun and honest work, with eyes the color of summer grass that held both nervousness and hope. "Miss Bradford." His voice was deeper than she had imagined, rough around the edges like rope that had seen hard use but would never break when you needed it most. "Mr. Northwood." She managed to keep her voice steady, though her legs felt weak beneath her skirts. "Yes, I am Penelope." He smiled then, transforming his serious face into something warmer, and reached for her bag. "Welcome to Carlin. I hope the journey was not too difficult. Your letters mentioned you had never been west before." "No, never." She let him take the bag, noting the calluses on his hands, the strength in his fingers. These were hands that built things, that worked from dawn until dusk. Guilt twisted in her stomach again. "It was long, but the landscape grew more beautiful the farther I traveled." "Wait until you see the ranch." Enthusiasm crept into his voice as he led her toward a sturdy wagon. "The house sits in a valley with mountains on 3 sides. There is a creek that runs year-round, and in the mornings when the light first comes over the peaks, everything turns gold." She climbed up onto the wagon seat, accepting his steadying hand, and tried to imagine herself belonging to such a place. Behind them, the stagecoach driver tossed down a small trunk, everything she owned in the world fitting into 2 pieces of luggage. Thomas secured the trunk in the wagon bed and swung up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. As they rolled out of Carlin, past the handful of buildings that made up the town center, Penelope forced herself to speak. "Your letters painted such vivid pictures. I felt I could see the ranch even before arriving. I hoped my writing was not too plain. I am better with horses and cattle than words." "Not at all. You have a gift for description." She meant it. His letters had been what convinced her to take this desperate gamble. The way he wrote about the land with such obvious love, about building something that would last, about wanting a partner to share the work and the rewards. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels crunching over the dry earth, kicking up small clouds of dust that hung in the still air. The landscape stretched vast and open on all sides, sagebrush and scrub dotting the pale ground, mountains rising in the distance like sleeping giants. The sky seemed impossibly big, an endless dome of blue that made Penelope feel simultaneously small and somehow more real than she had felt in years. "I should tell you," Thomas said finally, not looking at her but keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "I was nervous about meeting you. Afraid you would take one look and climb right back on that stage." Penelope turned to him in surprise. "Why would you think that?" "I am just a rancher, Miss Bradford. I work with my hands and my home is simple. You come from Philadelphia, from a city with culture and refinement. I worried my letters might have promised more than reality could deliver. Mr. Northwood, I did not come seeking culture or refinement. The words came out more forcefully than she intended. I came looking for honesty and a chance to build a life that meant something. If you are worried about disappointing me, please do not be. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw relief and something deeper in his eyes. Thomas, please call me Thomas. If we are to be married, formality seems unnecessary. Then you must call me Penelope. That is a beautiful name. He said it simply, as a statement of fact, and somehow that made it mean more than any flowery compliment could have. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Penelope caught her breath despite herself. The house was not large, a simple wooden structure with a wide porch, but it sat nestled in the valley exactly as Thomas had described, protected by mountains that glowed purple and gold in the late afternoon light. A barn stood to one side, corrals beyond that, and she could see the thin silver line of the creek Thomas had mentioned, cottonwoods growing along its banks providing the only real trees visible for miles. It is not much yet, Thomas said, and she could hear both pride and apology in his voice. But I own the land free and clear, 200 acres with water rights. The herd is small but growing. In 5 years, maybe 10, this could be one of the finest ranches in northern Nevada. It is beautiful, Penelope said and meant it. She could see the potential here, the way a woman's touch could transform the bare-bones structure into a real home. Gardens could grow near the creek, curtains in the windows, perhaps a rocking chair on that porch where someone could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the mountains. But even as she thought these things, the secret inside her chest tightened like a fist around her heart. She had no right to these dreams, not when she was withholding the truth. Thomas pulled the wagon up to the house, setting the brake with a practiced motion. We should talk about the arrangements. I want you to feel comfortable here, to know that you are safe. He climbed down and came around to help her descend, his hands careful and respectful at her waist. I prepared a room for you upstairs. We can marry as soon as you feel ready, but there is no rush. I want you to be certain. Standing there in front of this house that could be her home, looking up at this good man who was offering her everything she had hoped for and more, Penelope felt the weight of her deception become unbearable. She had traveled 2,000 miles on a foundation of lies, allowing him to believe she could give him the family his letters had spoken of wanting, the children who would inherit this land he was building. Thomas, I need to tell you something. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Before we go any further, before we make any plans, there is something you must know about me. He studied her face, his expression growing serious. All right. Come inside and we will talk. The interior of the house was as simple as the exterior, but clean and well maintained. The main room served as kitchen and living space combined, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, the kind of pieces built to last generations. Stairs along the back wall led up to what must be the bedrooms. Everything spoke of a man who took care with his belongings, who built for the future. Thomas gestured to the table, pulling out a chair for her before taking a seat himself. Whatever you need to say, I am listening. Penelope folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. In her letters, she had hinted at a past, at reasons for leaving Philadelphia, but she had never told him the full truth. Now, sitting in this kitchen that smelled of coffee and wood smoke, she forced herself to meet his eyes. I was married before. The words felt like stones in her mouth. 3 years ago, to a man my father chose. Robert was wealthy, established, everything a Philadelphia girl was supposed to want. I was 19 and too young to know I had a choice. Thomas nodded slowly but said nothing, letting her continue at her own pace. The marriage was difficult from the start. Robert wanted an ornament, someone to display at parties and then ignore. But more than that, he wanted an heir. He was obsessed with having a son to carry on the family name. Penelope drew a shaky breath. A year passed, then two, and I did not conceive. Robert insisted I see doctors, specialists. They ran tests, examinations that were humiliating and painful. She had to pause, the memories still sharp even after all this time. Thomas remained quiet, but she saw his hands clench briefly into fists before relaxing again. The doctors all said the same thing. Something is wrong inside me, something that cannot be fixed. I will never be able to carry a child. The final sentence came out in a rush. I am barren, Thomas. Robert divorced me for it, claimed I had deceived him, though I had no way of knowing before we married. My family was disgraced. My father told me I had ruined the family name and that I should disappear rather than further embarrass them. Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the ticking of a clock on the mantel and the distant sound of wind against the windows. Penelope kept her eyes on her hands, unable to bear seeing disappointment or anger on Thomas's face. She had known this moment would come, had rehearsed what she would say, but the reality of it was worse than she had imagined. So you came west to escape the shame. His voice was neutral, impossible to read. Yes. But more than that, I came because your letters spoke of building a life together, of partnership and mutual respect, things I never had in my first marriage. She forced herself to look up at him. I should have told you before I came. It was wrong of me to accept your proposal without revealing the truth. I will understand completely if you want to send me back. I can return to Carlin, find work there perhaps, repay you for the ticket. Thomas stood abruptly, and Penelope's heart sank. He walked to the window, looking out at the valley beyond, his back to her. The silence stretched so long she wanted to scream just to break it. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. You think I would send you away because you cannot have children. You wrote in your letters about wanting a family, about children who would grow up knowing this land. I did. He turned to face her, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. But Penelope, I also wrote about wanting a partner, someone to share this life with. Someone honest and strong enough to build something meaningful. He crossed back to the table, dropping to one knee beside her chair and taking her hands in his. You have traveled 2,000 miles, left everything you knew, and had the courage to tell me a truth that must have terrified you. That is what I see, not some failure or deficiency, but strength. Penelope felt her own tears spill over. But the children you wanted, the family. Then we will fill this house with love, Thomas said firmly, squeezing her hands. We will build a family in other ways. There are children who need homes, orphans from mining accidents or illness. We can take in young people who need work and a safe place. Family is not just blood, Penelope. It is what we make it, what we choose to create together. You truly mean that. She searched his face for any hint of false comfort, any shadow of disappointment. I do. He reached up, gently wiping the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. I will not lie and say I had not imagined children of our own. But I would rather have a lifetime with you, building whatever family we can create together, than have a dozen children with someone I cannot trust or respect. You were honest with me when it would have been easier to hide the truth. That matters more than anything else. Relief flooded through Penelope so powerfully she felt dizzy with it. I was so afraid. All during the journey, I kept thinking I should turn back, that it was cruel to let you hope for something I could not provide. Hope is not something that gets used up or wasted. Thomas stood, pulling her gently to her feet. We will find new things to hope for together. He smiled, that same transforming expression she had seen earlier. Besides, running a ranch this size will keep us busy enough. Adding a herd of children to chase after might be more than either of us could handle. Penelope laughed, the sound startling her with its genuine joy. When was the last time she had laughed like that? Are you comparing children to cattle, Mr. Northwood? Thomas, he corrected with mock sternness. And I would never make such a comparison. Cattle are far easier to manage. They stood there in the fading light of the kitchen, hands still clasped, and Penelope felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she had carried for so long, the shame and fear and certainty that she was somehow broken, began to ease. Not disappearing completely, but becoming manageable, something she could live with rather than something that defined her. I would like to see the rest of the house, she said. If that is all right, of course. Thomas released her hands, though slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. Let me show you your room first, so you can freshen up from the journey. He led her upstairs to a small but pleasant room at the front of the house. The bed was neatly made, a quilt in a simple pattern covering it. A washstand stood in one corner, and the window looked out over the valley toward the mountains. I will bring up your trunk, Thomas said from the doorway. Supper will be ready in about an hour if you would like to rest before then. I am not that delicate, Penelope assured him. I would rather help with supper if you will let me. I want to start learning my way around the kitchen. It is your kitchen now, too. The simple statement carried weight, an acknowledgement that this was now her home if she chose to stay. Come down whenever you are ready. After he left, Penelope moved to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. The mountains caught the last rays of sunlight, turning them shades of rose and amber she had never seen before. This vast, empty, beautiful land was so different from everything she had known. In Philadelphia, her failure to conceive had made her an object of pity and scorn, a woman who could not fulfill her basic purpose. Here, standing in this simple room in a house built by hand in the middle of nowhere, she felt that old definition crumbling away. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into a simpler dress, and made her way downstairs. Thomas was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot that smelled of beef and vegetables. I am not much of a cook, he admitted when he saw her, but I have learned to make a few things that will not poison us. Let me help. Penelope moved to his side, peering into the pot. Stew. Of a sort. There is bread in the box there, from the woman in town who bakes. She brings out loaves twice a week. They worked together in comfortable silence, setting the table, slicing bread, finding butter in the cold box that sat in a shaded corner. It was all remarkably domestic, and Penelope found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. This was real, this life she could feel taking shape around her. Not the suffocating formality of her life in Philadelphia, where every meal was a performance, and every conversation a careful dance around unspoken rules, but something genuine and solid. Over supper, Thomas told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in Nevada where water was precious, and the winters could be harsh despite the autumn heat. He spoke about his plans for expansion, about breeding better stock, about maybe getting some horses to train and sell. I came here 5 years ago, he explained, sopping up stew with a piece of bread. Worked as a hand on other ranches, saved every penny I could. When this land came available, I bought it with everything I had. It is not the biggest spread or the most profitable yet, but it is mine. Ours, he corrected himself, meeting her eyes. How old are you, Thomas? Penelope realized she did not know this basic fact about the man she had agreed to marry. 26. Old enough to know what I want and young enough to still have the strength to work for it, he smiled. And you? 22. Old enough to have made my share of mistakes and learned from them, I hope. We all make mistakes. His voice was gentle. Trusting your father's choice was not a mistake. It was what you were taught to do. How you have handled what came after, that shows your true character. They cleaned up together after the meal, and Thomas showed her the rest of the house. His room was at the back, smaller than the one he had given her, furnished with just a bed and a chest of drawers. Everything was orderly and spare, a room for sleeping and nothing more. "I should check on the horses before it gets full dark," he said as they returned downstairs. "You are welcome to come along if you would like, or you can settle in here, whatever feels comfortable. I would like to see the horses." Penelope was not ready to be alone yet, not ready to let the reality of her situation sink in without the steadying presence of this man, who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than her first husband had in 3 years of marriage. The barn was larger than she had expected, well built and organized. 3 horses occupied stalls, lifting their heads at the sound of footsteps. Thomas introduced each one, running his hands over their necks and backs with obvious affection. "This is Copper, my riding horse. The mare there is Daisy, steady and reliable for wagon work, and that big fellow is Duke, still young but learning fast." He pulled carrots from a bin and handed one to Penelope. "Hold your hand flat and let him take it. He is gentle." Penelope approached Duke carefully, extending the carrot on her palm. The horse's lips were soft and ticklish as he took the treat, and she laughed at the sensation. Thomas smiled, watching her, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. "I never spent much time around horses," she admitted. "In Philadelphia, we kept a carriage horse, but I was not allowed near the stables. You can learn." Thomas fed his own carrot to Copper. "If you want to live on a ranch, knowing how to handle horses is useful. I can teach you to ride if you would like." "I would like that very much." They finished the evening chores together, Thomas explaining what needed doing each day, showing her where feed was stored and how to check the water troughs. The physical work felt good after the long days of sitting in the stagecoach, and Penelope found herself genuinely interested in learning these new skills. As twilight deepened into true darkness, they walked back to the house. The temperature had dropped significantly, the dry air releasing its heat the moment the sun disappeared. Overhead, stars began to emerge in numbers Penelope had never seen, the sky so clear and dark that the Milky Way stood out like a river of light. "I have never seen so many stars," she breathed, stopping to stare upward. Thomas stopped beside her. "City lights hide them. Out here on a clear night you can see forever." They stood in silence, necks craned back, until Penelope began to feel dizzy from the vastness of it all. She lowered her gaze to find Thomas watching her instead of the sky. "I am glad you came," he said quietly. "No matter what happens next, I am glad you took the chance. So am I." She surprised herself with how much she meant it. 24 hours ago, she had been on a stagecoach, terrified and certain she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Now, standing under these impossible stars with this unexpected man, she felt something that might have been the beginning of hope. Inside, Thomas lit lamps against the darkness and stoked the fire in the stove to take off the evening chill. "I usually turn in early," he said. "Ranching keeps you on sun time, but you should stay up if you prefer. Make yourself at home." "I am tired from traveling," Penelope admitted. "Early to bed sounds perfect." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure how to end the evening. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "Sleep well, Penelope. If you need anything at all, my door is open." "Thank you, Thomas, for everything, for understanding." "Nothing to thank me for." He touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of comfort rather than anything more. "Welcome home." Penelope climbed the stairs to her room, changed into her nightgown, and slipped between the sheets. The bed was comfortable, the quilt warm, and through the window she could still see those impossible stars. She thought she would lie awake for hours, her mind churning over everything that had happened, but sleep took her almost immediately, deep and dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of movement downstairs. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, but then memory returned. Nevada, the ranch, Thomas. She dressed quickly in a simple work dress and went downstairs to find Thomas at the stove frying eggs. "Good morning." He glanced over with a smile. "I hope I did not wake you." "No, I should be up. What time is it?" "Just after 6. Like I said, sun time." He plated the eggs along with thick slices of bread toasted on the stove. "Coffee is ready if you drink it." They ate breakfast together, and Penelope felt herself settling into this new routine with surprising ease. After the meal, Thomas outlined the day's work, checking fences in the near pastures and moving some cattle to better grazing. "I can manage alone if you want to spend the day settling in," he offered. "But you are also welcome to come along if you want to see more of the ranch." "I want to come." The decision was easy. Sitting alone in the house would only give her too much time to think, to second-guess, to worry. Better to stay busy, to learn this new life by living it. Thomas saddled Daisy and boosted Penelope up onto the mare's broad back before mounting Copper himself. They rode out across the valley, Thomas pointing out landmarks and boundaries. The ranch stretched farther than Penelope had realized, 200 acres of scrubland and meadow, with the mountains forming natural barriers on 3 sides. The work was harder than she expected, dismounting to open and close gates, helping drive cattle from one area to another. Her dress grew dusty, sweat trickled down her back despite the cool morning air, and her legs ached from riding. But there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing tangible results from their efforts, in working alongside Thomas as an actual partner. They stopped at midday beside the creek, letting the horses drink while they shared the lunch Thomas had packed. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, cottonwoods providing blessed shade. "You did well today," Thomas said, handing her a canteen. "Better than many hired hands I have worked with." "I am extremely sore," Penelope admitted, "but I enjoyed it. I like seeing what you do, understanding how the ranch works. It is a good life, if you do not mind hard work and solitude. We are not close to town and visitors are rare. Some people find the isolation difficult." Penelope thought about her life in Philadelphia, always surrounded by people, always under scrutiny, every action judged and measured against impossible standards. "I think I prefer the solitude," she said honestly. "In the city, I was never alone but always lonely. Here, even when there is no one around for miles, I feel less alone." Thomas nodded, understanding. "I felt the same when I first came west, like I could finally breathe without someone watching." They talked more freely as they sat by the creek, sharing stories from their pasts. Thomas told her about growing up in Missouri, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, working his way west through a series of odd jobs until he found his calling with cattle and horses. Penelope talked about her childhood in Philadelphia, the suffocating expectations, the education that taught her to be ornamental rather than useful. "I learned to embroider and paint watercolors and make polite conversation," she said with a trace of bitterness. "But nothing practical, nothing that would help me actually live in the world. You are learning now." Thomas stood, offering his hand to help her up, and doing a fine job of it. The afternoon passed in more work, and by the time they returned to the ranch, Penelope was exhausted but oddly content. She helped Thomas tend the horses, learning how to remove the saddles properly, how to brush the animals down, where everything was stored. Over supper that night, Thomas brought up the subject they had been avoiding. "I spoke to the pastor in town last month, told him I was expecting a bride and we would need his services. Whenever you are ready, we can make the arrangements. But there is no rush, Penelope. Take whatever time you need." Penelope considered this. She knew the practical reasons for marrying quickly, the propriety of it, the legal protections it would provide. But more than that, she found herself not wanting to wait. Thomas had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. He had accepted her truth without judgment. "Why delay building the life they had both come here seeking? I am ready," she said. "Whenever you think best." Thomas looked surprised, then pleased. "Are you certain? It has only been 2 days." "I am certain. We could wait weeks or months, but what would change? We are both here for the same reasons, both committed to making this work. The marriage is a formality, a legal recognition of a partnership we have already begun. Then I will ride into town tomorrow and arrange it with the pastor. If he is available, we could marry the day after tomorrow." "That would be fine." Penelope felt remarkably calm about it, no nervousness or doubt, just a quiet certainty that this was right. The next day, Thomas rode to Carlin while Penelope stayed at the ranch. She spent the time exploring the house more thoroughly, making mental notes about changes she might make, things they would need. The house was clean but bare, functional rather than comfortable. She could imagine curtains at the windows, rugs on the floors, perhaps some pictures on the walls. Small touches that would make it feel more like a home. She also found the small garden plot behind the house, overgrown with weeds but with good soil underneath. Next spring, she could plant vegetables, maybe some flowers. The thought pleased her, the idea of putting down roots quite literally. Thomas returned in the late afternoon with news that the pastor could perform the ceremony the following day at noon. "He was pleased to hear you had arrived safely," Thomas said, "and curious to meet you. I am afraid the whole town will want to come." The whole town. Penelope felt a flutter of nervousness. Carlin is not very big, maybe 200 people all told. A wedding is entertainment, a break from the usual routine, but we can keep it small if you prefer, just us and the pastor. Penelope thought about it. Part of her wanted exactly that, a quiet ceremony with no fuss. But another part, the part that was beginning to feel genuinely hopeful about this new life, wanted to meet her neighbors, to begin building connections in this community that would be her home. Let them come, she decided. We will need friends here, people we can count on. Might as well start making those connections now. Thomas looked relieved. I was hoping you would say that. The people here are good folk, ranchers and miners mostly, hardworking and honest. I think you will like them. They spent the evening preparing, Thomas cleaning his best suit while Penelope altered the nicest dress she had brought, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She had not brought a wedding dress, had not wanted to presume, but the blue would do fine. It was more practical anyway, something she could wear again, rather than a confection that would hang unused in a closet. That night, lying in bed, Penelope found herself thinking about the ceremony to come. Her first wedding had been a grand affair. Hundreds of guests, flowers, music, her father beaming with pride at the advantageous match he had arranged. She had worn a dress that cost more than most people earned in a year, had spoken vows she barely understood, had felt like a doll being moved through scenes in a play. Tomorrow would be different, simple, honest, real. She fell asleep thinking about Thomas's steady presence beside her, about building a life based on mutual respect rather than social obligation. Morning arrived clear and bright, the sky that impossible Nevada blue. Penelope bathed carefully, arranged her hair in a simple style, and put on the blue dress. She had no jewelry except her grandmother's pearl earrings, small and understated. Looking at herself in the mirror, she thought she looked older than 22, the experiences of the past few years showing in her eyes, but also stronger. More herself. Downstairs, Thomas was already dressed, looking uncomfortable in the formal suit. He smiled when he saw her. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." She took in his appearance, the way the suit emphasized his broad shoulders, the care he had taken with shaving and combing his hair. "You clean up rather well yourself." They rode to Carlin together in the wagon, both uncharacteristically quiet. Penelope felt butterflies in her stomach, but not the nauseating dread she had felt before her first wedding. This was nerves mixed with anticipation, the feeling of standing on the edge of something new and unknown but potentially wonderful. The church in Carlin was small, a simple wooden structure with a cross on the steeple. As Thomas had predicted, it seemed half the town had turned out, people milling around outside in their Sunday best. They turned as the wagon approached, faces curious and friendly. Thomas helped Penelope down, and immediately they were surrounded by well-wishers. The pastor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, introduced himself as Pastor Williams. Women clustered around Penelope, welcoming her and exclaiming over her dress, while men clapped Thomas on the back and made jokes about married life. Among the crowd, a woman about Penelope's age pushed forward, smiling warmly. "I am Sarah Chen," she said. "My husband and I run the general store. It is so wonderful to have another young woman in town. You must come visit once you are settled." "I would like that very much," Penelope said, grateful for the friendly overture. Another woman, older and more reserved, introduced herself as Martha Hayes. "My husband and I have the ranch bordering Thomas's to the east. If you need anything at all, you send word. We take care of our own out here." The warmth and acceptance surprised Penelope. She had expected curiosity, perhaps judgment about being a mail-order bride, but instead found genuine welcome. These were people who understood hardship and the courage it took to build a life on the frontier. They respected anyone willing to work and contribute to the community. Pastor Williams called everyone inside, and the ceremony began. It was simple and short, the traditional words spoken in the plain church with wildflowers someone had picked decorating the altar. When Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady, his voice clear as he promised to honor and cherish her. Penelope made the same promises, meaning every word, looking into his green eyes and seeing her future there. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Williams said with a smile. "Thomas, you may kiss your bride." Thomas leaned in carefully, giving Penelope time to pull away if she wanted, but she met him halfway. The kiss was brief and chaste, appropriate for the public setting, but it sent warmth through her chest nonetheless. The congregation cheered, and suddenly they were married, walking back down the aisle together as husband and wife while people threw rice and called out congratulations. Outside, tables had been set up with food, the community contributing to an impromptu celebration. There was cake and punch, cold chicken and fresh bread, pies made with the last of the summer berries. People pressed around them, wanting to shake hands and offer advice. Penelope found herself laughing at some of the suggestions, blushing at others. Sarah Chen stayed close, running interference when the attention became too much, and Penelope felt the beginning of a real friendship forming. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas caught Penelope's eye across the crowd, raising his eyebrows in question. She nodded slightly, and he began making their excuses, thanking people for coming and accepting final congratulations. They climbed back into the wagon amid more cheers and ribald jokes, and Thomas drove them out of town toward home. The silence between them now was different, weighted with the knowledge that everything had changed. They were married now, legally and spiritually bound. The sun was lowering toward the mountains when they reached the ranch, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Thomas helped Penelope down from the wagon and they stood for a moment, just looking at each other. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like myself, but also different," Penelope said slowly, trying to articulate the strange mixture of emotions. "Like I have become someone new while still being who I always was. I know what you mean." Thomas took her hand, the gold ring on her finger catching the light. "I want you to know, Penelope, that nothing has to change tonight unless you want it to. We are married, yes, but that does not mean there are expectations or demands. We can continue as we have been, taking our time, learning each other." Penelope squeezed his hand, moved by his consideration. "Thank you for saying that. I think I would like to continue slowly, if that is all right with you. I want this to be real, Thomas, not just obligation or duty. I want us to come together because we choose to, because we care for each other, not because some ceremony says we should." "I want that too." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "We have all the time in the world." They went inside together, changing out of their wedding clothes into more practical garments. Over a simple supper, they talked about the day, about the people they had met, about what came next. The conversation flowed easily, and Penelope marveled again at how comfortable she felt with this man she barely knew. It was so different from her first marriage, where every interaction had been stilted and formal, weighted with unspoken expectations and disappointments. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into a rhythm of daily life. Penelope learned the ranch work, becoming more confident with the horses and cattle, understanding the patterns of the land and animals. Thomas proved to be a patient teacher, explaining things clearly and never making her feel foolish for not knowing. In turn, Penelope began transforming the house into a real home. She made curtains from fabric Sarah Chen helped her select at the general store, sewed cushions for the hard wooden chairs, started a collection of preserves from the last of the autumn harvest she bought in town. Small changes, but they accumulated, making the space feel lived in and loved. The nights grew colder as October advanced, frost appearing on the ground in the mornings. Thomas brought in extra firewood, teaching Penelope how to bank the stove so it would burn through the night. They took to sitting together in the evenings, Thomas reading from the small collection of books he owned while Penelope sewed or mended. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other's histories and hopes. Other times they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence, the easy companionship of two people who fit well together. One evening in mid-October, a knock came at the door just as they were finishing supper. Thomas answered it to find a young boy, maybe 10 years old, shivering on the porch. "Please, mister," the boy said, his teeth chattering. "My name is Jacob Miller. My pa sent me. There has been trouble at our place and we need help." Thomas pulled the boy inside immediately, wrapping him in a blanket while Penelope heated soup. The story came out in fits and starts. The Miller family, homesteaders trying to farm land north of Carlin, had been hit by early snows in the mountains. Their roof had partially collapsed under the weight, and Jacob's father had been injured trying to repair it. "Ma is with him, but she is scared," Jacob said, accepting the soup gratefully. "We do not know anyone else close enough to help. Pa said you were good people, that you would come. Of course we will come." Thomas was already moving, gathering supplies. He looked at Penelope. "It is a hard ride in the dark, and I do not know what we will find when we get there. You should stay here where it is safe. Absolutely not. Penelope was already putting on her warmest coat. If someone is injured, they will need help. I may not be a doctor, but I know basic nursing. I am coming with you. Thomas looked like he might argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He nodded instead. All right, but stay close and do what I say. The mountain trails can be dangerous at night. They saddled the horses quickly, Jacob riding double with Thomas on Copper while Penelope followed on Daisy. The boy directed them north, away from the ranch and toward the mountains. The temperature dropped steadily as they climbed, their breath visible in the moonlight. It took 2 hours of hard riding to reach the Miller place, a small cabin tucked into a fold of the hills. The roof had indeed partially caved in, and when they entered, they found a woman huddled by a small fire, trying to keep 3 smaller children warm while tending to a man lying on a pallet, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Thank God, the woman, Alice Miller, breathed when she saw them. Thank God you came. Thomas knelt beside the injured man, examining the leg carefully. It is broken and badly. We need to set it properly or it will not heal right. He looked at Penelope. Can you help me? Together, working by lamplight, they set the break as best they could while Alice held her husband's hand, and the children huddled together watching with wide, frightened eyes. It was brutal work, and the man, Henry Miller, screamed despite the whiskey Thomas poured down his throat first. But finally it was done, the leg splinted with boards Thomas found in the collapsed section of roof. He cannot be moved for at least a few days, Thomas told Alice. And this cabin is not safe with the roof damaged like that. You will all come back to our place until we can get this fixed and Henry can recover enough to travel. We could not impose like that, Alice protested weakly, though relief showed plainly on her face. It is not an imposition, Penelope said firmly. We have room and you need help. That is what neighbors do. They loaded the Millers into the wagon, Henry carefully positioned on blankets in the bed, the children tucked around him for warmth. Alice and Jacob rode the horses while Thomas drove the wagon and Penelope walked alongside, leading Daisy. It was nearly dawn by the time they reached the Northwood ranch, everyone exhausted and half frozen. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The Northwood house, built for just 2 people, suddenly held 8. Penelope and Alice worked together to manage the cooking and cleaning, while the children, ranging in age from Jacob at 10 down to little Emma at 4, helped where they could. Thomas and Jacob rode out each day to tend both ranches, making sure the Northwood cattle were cared for while also checking on the Miller homestead. Henry's fever broke on the 3rd day, and the doctor from Carlin, who Thomas brought out to examine the leg, pronounced the setting good and the patient likely to make a full recovery given time and rest. You did well, Dr. Patterson told Thomas and Penelope. Many people would have panicked and made things worse. You may have saved his leg, possibly his life. With crisis averted, life began to settle into a new routine. The Miller children brought noise and chaos to the previously quiet house, but also laughter and energy. Penelope found herself enjoying their presence, playing games with little Emma, helping the middle children with their letters, talking with Jacob about his dreams of someday having his own ranch. One night, after the children were finally asleep and Henry was resting comfortably, Alice joined Penelope in the kitchen where she was cleaning up from supper. I want to thank you, Alice said quietly, not just for taking us in, but for how you have been with the children. They needed this, needed to feel safe and cared for after being so scared. They are wonderful children, Penelope said honestly. You should be very proud. They are my whole world. Alice dried a plate, her hands moving automatically. I know some people think we were foolish, trying to homestead so far from town with children. But Henry wanted to build something for them, a legacy. Penelope thought about her conversation with Thomas on that first day, about filling a house with love instead of children. Looking around at the organized chaos the Miller family had brought, she felt a pang of something that might have been longing but also a deep contentment. This was good too, this temporary family, this chance to help and nurture even if the children were not hers to keep. The Millers stayed for 2 weeks before Henry was well enough to be moved back to their own place. Thomas organized a work party, gathering men from neighboring ranches to help repair the Miller roof properly before winter truly set in. Penelope joined Alice and several other women in preparing food for the workers, feeling herself becoming part of the community in a way she never had in Philadelphia. When the Millers finally left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Penelope found herself missing the children's laughter, the constant activity, the feeling of being needed in such an immediate way. "You were wonderful with them," Thomas said that first evening after the Millers had gone, as they sat by the fire. "The children adored you, and Alice told me she does not know what she would have done without your help." "I enjoyed having them here," Penelope admitted. "I know it was crowded and chaotic, but it felt good to be useful that way, to care for children even temporarily." Thomas studied her face in the firelight. "You have been thinking about what you told me about not being able to have children." "I have." Penelope set down her sewing. "Being with the Millers made me realize that while I mourn not being able to carry a child myself, there are other ways to be a mother, other ways to build a family. You were right about that." "We could look into adoption," Thomas said carefully. "There is an orphanage in Carson City. Or we could take in children who need temporary placement, like we did with the Millers but more formally." "Would you want that, truly?" Penelope searched his face for any hint of false comfort. "I would." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "These past weeks, seeing the house full of life and laughter, I realized that is what I really wanted all along. Not just children of my blood, but a family built on love and choice. Children who might otherwise have nothing, who we could give a home and a future." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "I would like that too. Not right away perhaps, but someday soon. I want to be a mother, Thomas, even if not in the traditional way. Then we will make it happen." He pulled her closer and she leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down, planning futures and dreaming together. As October faded into November, the first real snow came, blanketing the valley in white. Thomas taught Penelope how to move through winter on the ranch, the different challenges it brought. They worked together to ensure the cattle had access to unfrozen water, to keep paths clear between the house and barn, to maintain the various structures against the weight of snow and the bite of wind. The physical closeness the work required, the constant touching and helping and supporting each other through the tasks, began to build an intimacy between them that went beyond friendship. Penelope found herself noticing things about Thomas she had not before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their strength, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. One evening in late November, as they prepared for bed, Thomas paused outside Penelope's room. "I want you to know," he said softly, "that I have come to care for you deeply. Not just as a partner or companion, but as a woman I could love. Am learning to love if I am honest." Penelope's breath caught. They had been married nearly 2 months, had worked and lived side by side, but this was the first time either of them had spoken of love. "I feel the same," she admitted. "You have shown me what marriage can be, what partnership means. I find myself thinking about you constantly, looking forward to seeing you, missing you when you are gone even for a few hours." "May I kiss you?" Thomas asked. "Properly this time, not just for show in a church." Yes. Penelope stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. The kiss was everything the church kiss had not been, slow and deep and full of growing emotion. Thomas's hands came up to cup her face, his touch reverent, and Penelope melted into him, her own arms wrapping around his waist. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I do not want to rush you," Thomas said, his voice rough. "But I also do not want to spend another night sleeping alone when my wife is just down the hall." "Then do not," Penelope whispered. "I am ready, Thomas. I want to be your wife in every way." He searched her face one more time, making sure, then took her hand and led her to his room. They came together slowly, learning each other with patience and care, and when Penelope finally fell asleep in Thomas's arms hours later, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The next morning she woke to find Thomas already awake, watching her with a soft expression. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband," she smiled, stretching lazily. "I think we should move my things into this room. It seems silly to maintain 2 bedrooms when we only need one." "I was hoping you would say that." He kissed her forehead. "Though I will miss having a spare room when we start bringing children home." "We will manage," Penelope said confidently. "We will build on to the house if we need to, make room for however large our family grows." Over breakfast, they made plans. Come spring, they would travel to Carson City and speak to the orphanage about adoption. In the meantime, they would prepare, building an addition onto the house to create more sleeping space, saving money to ensure they could provide for additional mouths to feed. December brought heavier snows and bitter cold, but also a sense of settled contentment. Penelope and Thomas fell into the rhythms of married life, working and living and loving together. They hosted Christmas dinner for the Millers and several other neighboring families, the house full of warmth and laughter despite the frozen world outside. On Christmas night, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up together, Thomas pulled a small package from his pocket. "I made this for you," he said, suddenly shy. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something." Penelope unwrapped the package to find a wooden carving, a perfect miniature of their house nestled in its valley. Every detail was exact, from the porch to the barn to the mountains rising behind. "Thomas, this is beautiful. How long did this take you?" "I have been working on it in the evenings when you were busy with other things." He pointed to a tiny detail, a figure standing on the porch. "That is you, waiting for me to come home. I wanted to capture that feeling I get when I ride in and see you there, the way it makes this place feel like a home instead of just a house." Penelope threw her arms around him, too moved for words. She had a gift for him too, a new saddle blanket she had woven in secret, but somehow his gift meant more, this physical representation of the home they had built together. Winter slowly gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal the first brave shoots of green. Penelope planted her garden, vegetables and flowers both, while Thomas prepared for calving season. In March, they received word that a young girl at the Carson City orphanage needed placement. She was 8 years old, her parents killed in a mining accident with no other family willing to take her. Penelope and Thomas made the journey to Carson City, a full day's travel each way. The orphanage was a grim building, but the staff seemed kind enough. They met the girl, whose name was Lucy, a solemn child with dark hair and darker eyes that had seen too much sadness. "Would you like to come live with us on our ranch?" Penelope asked gently, crouching down to Lucy's level. "We have horses and cattle, and in the spring the whole valley is covered with wildflowers. You would have your own room, and we would make sure you went to school and learned reading and writing." Lucy looked between Penelope and Thomas, clearly uncertain. "Forever, forever," Thomas confirmed. We want to adopt you properly, make you our daughter in every legal way. The Northwood name would be yours. I do not know how to be someone's daughter, Lucy whispered. At least not anymore. That is all right, Penelope said, feeling her heart break and heal simultaneously for this brave, broken child. We will all learn together. We have never been parents before either. Lucy considered this, then nodded slowly. I would like to see the horses. The paperwork took several weeks to complete, but by April, Lucy was officially theirs. She settled into the ranch cautiously at first, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this new security to be ripped away. But as days turned into weeks and then months, she began to relax, to smile, even to laugh. Watching Thomas teach Lucy to ride, seeing her help with the garden and play with the barn cats, Penelope felt a fierce joy she had never experienced before. This was motherhood, she realized, not the bearing of children but the raising of them, the daily work of nurturing and teaching and loving. In June, the orphanage contacted them again. They had 2 brothers, ages 5 and 7, who needed placement together. Could the Northwoods possibly consider them? Thomas and Penelope looked at each other, then at Lucy, who had been listening intently. What do you think? Penelope asked her daughter. Would you like to have brothers? Lucy's face lit up. Really? I always wanted siblings. And so Daniel and William Miller joined the family, no relation to the homesteading Millers but sharing the same surname by coincidence. The house filled with noise and energy, and Thomas and Penelope worked harder than ever, both at the ranch and at parenting. Some days were difficult, when the children had nightmares or acted out from old hurts. But more days were good, filled with small triumphs and growing trust. By the time autumn returned, a full year after Penelope had arrived in Nevada, the Northwood house felt complete. Lucy was reading at a level far beyond her years, thriving on the attention and stability. Daniel and William had grown brown from the sun, their bodies filling out with regular meals, and their eyes losing the haunted look they had arrived with. On a crisp evening in late September, Penelope stood on the porch watching Thomas help William learn to rope a fence post while Daniel and Lucy played with the dogs. The garden she had planted was heavy with the last of the summer vegetables, ready for harvest. The mountains behind the house glowed purple in the fading light. Sarah Chen rode up the drive, waving cheerfully. She and Penelope had become close friends over the year, visiting regularly despite the distance between town and ranch. I brought some fabric samples I thought you might like, Sarah called, dismounting. For those new curtains you were talking about. Come inside, I just made lemonade. Penelope led her friend into the kitchen, now expanded as part of the addition Thomas had built the previous winter. As they spread out fabric samples on the table, Sarah said casually, You and Thomas have done something remarkable here, you know. People in town talk about it, how you took in those children and gave them a real home. We gave them no more than they deserved, Penelope said. Every child deserves love and security. Not everyone sees it that way. Sarah selected a cheerful yellow fabric. Most people would not have taken on 3 children with such different needs, but you have made it work, made them into a real family. Penelope thought about her first marriage, about the shame and failure she had felt, about the long journey west that had seemed like running away. I am happier than I ever imagined I could be, she said honestly. A year ago, I thought my life was over, that I had failed at the most basic requirement of being a woman. Now I realize I just needed to find a different path. And what a path it has been. Sarah squeezed her hand. You have a good man in Thomas and a beautiful family. You should be very proud. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Penelope told Thomas about the conversation. They were sitting on the porch, their usual evening ritual, watching the stars emerge. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked. "Taking on so much so quickly?" 3 children in 1 year is a lot. "Never." Penelope took his hand. "Do you? Not for a second." He pulled her closer. "Though I think we should probably stop at 3 for now. The house is officially full." Penelope laughed. "Agreed. Though if the orphanage calls with another child in desperate need, you know we will at least consider it." "I know." He kissed the top of her head. "That is one of the things I love most about you, that compassionate heart that cannot turn away from someone who needs help." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Thomas spoke again. "I want to tell you something. When I first decided to send for a mail-order bride, I had this picture in my head of what I wanted. A partner to help with the ranch, yes, but also someone to give me children, to build a traditional family. I thought I knew exactly what I needed." "And what do you think now?" Penelope asked softly. "I think I had no idea what I really needed." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "You have given me so much more than I imagined possible. You taught me that family is about choice and love, not just blood. You showed me that strength comes in many forms, that the courage to be vulnerable is just as important as the courage to face down a stampede. You made this house a home, these children a family, and me a better man than I was before you came." Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You did the same for me. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was broken, Thomas. I thought I had nothing to offer, that I was fundamentally damaged. You saw past that, saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. You gave me a chance to become someone new while still being myself. I love you, Penelope Northwood." He wiped away her tears with his thumbs. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too." She kissed him, pouring a year's worth of gratitude and affection and deep abiding love into it. Later, lying in bed with Thomas's arms around her, Penelope thought about that first conversation in the kitchen, when she had confessed her secret with such terror. Thomas's response had seemed too good to be true then, too easy, too accepting. But he had meant every word, had proven it day after day for an entire year. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect autumn weather. Penelope woke early and went downstairs to start breakfast, but found Lucy already in the kitchen, carefully mixing pancake batter. "I wanted to help," the girl said shyly. "You do so much for us, I thought I could make breakfast." "That is very thoughtful." Penelope hugged her daughter. "We can make it together." As they worked side by side, Lucy asked, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course, always." "When I first came here, I was scared all the time. I thought maybe you only wanted me to work, to help on the ranch. But you really wanted a daughter, did you not? You really love me." Penelope's throat tightened. "More than anything in the world. You are my daughter in every way that matters, Lucy. I could not love you more if I had given birth to you myself." Lucy was quiet for a moment, then said, "I am glad I am here. I am glad you are my mother." "I am glad too, sweetheart. So very glad." When Thomas came down with the boys, he found the kitchen filled with laughter, pancakes piled high on plates, and his wife and daughter smiling at some shared joke. He caught Penelope's eye across the room, and the look they exchanged said everything words could not. This was what they had built together, this noisy, chaotic, loving family. Not the family either of them had originally envisioned, but something richer and more real. A family forged by choice rather than chance, strengthened by challenges overcome together, bound by love freely given and gratefully received. The seasons continued their endless cycle. The ranch prospered under their combined care, the herd growing, improvements made to buildings and fences. The children thrived, growing stronger and more confident. Lucy proved to have a natural way with horses and began helping Thomas train the younger stock. Daniel showed an aptitude for numbers, keeping careful tallies of the cattle and supplies. William, the youngest, had a gift for finding beauty everywhere, constantly bringing Penelope flowers or interesting rocks or feathers shed by passing birds. 2 years after Penelope's arrival, Martha Hayes, their neighbor, passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her husband, devastated and too old to manage the ranch alone, asked Thomas if he would be interested in buying the property. After much discussion and careful planning, the Northwoods expanded their holdings, more than doubling their acreage. With the expansion came the need for more help. They hired 2 ranch hands, young men who bunked in the barn and worked hard for fair wages. Penelope insisted on treating them as part of the extended family, including them in holiday celebrations, and making sure they had decent food and living conditions. The adoption of the ranch hands as honorary family members led to an interesting development. One of them, a shy young man named Peter, began courting Sarah Chen. When they married, Peter became manager of the Chen General Store, and the young couple became even closer friends to the Northwoods. Life was not without its challenges. The winter of 1885 brought devastating blizzards that killed some of their cattle despite their best efforts. Lucy struggled with nightmares on the anniversary of her parents' deaths, needing extra comfort and reassurance. Daniel broke his arm falling from a fence, and the weeks of healing were hard on everyone. But for every difficulty, there were a dozen joys. The first time William read an entire book on his own. Lucy's 14th birthday, when Thomas gave her a filly to train as her own. Daniel's proud presentation of a birdhouse he had built himself. The quiet evenings when the whole family gathered around the fire, content in each other's company. In 1886, the orphanage contacted them about a teenage girl, 15 years old and pregnant after an assault. She had nowhere to go, and the orphanage could not keep her once she gave birth. Could the Northwoods help? Penelope's response was immediate. Of course, she can stay as long as she needs. Grace arrived at the ranch frightened and ashamed, expecting judgment. Instead, she found acceptance. Penelope worked with her daily, preparing her for the baby's arrival, while Thomas treated her with the same respect he showed everyone. Lucy, now 12 and old enough to understand the situation, became fiercely protective of Grace. When Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy in the spring of 1887, she named him Hope, because the Northwoods had given her something she thought she had lost forever. She stayed on at the ranch, helping with household tasks and childcare, and eventually began training as a midwife under Dr. Patterson's guidance. Hope became the youngest member of their growing family, loved and cherished by everyone. Watching Thomas rock the baby to sleep, singing off-key lullabies, Penelope felt her heart might burst with love. "We have quite a household now," Thomas commented one evening, surveying the dinner table crowded with family. 5 children, a ranch hand, and however many guests happened to pass through. "Is it too much?" Penelope asked, though she knew the answer from the smile in his eyes. "It is perfect." He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Exactly what we promised that first day, remember? We filled this house with love." And so they had. The house that had once been a simple bachelor dwelling had transformed into something far greater. Laughter echoed through rooms that once knew only silence. The porch that Thomas had sat on alone now hosted family gatherings and celebrations. The land that he had worked by himself was now tended by many hands, all working toward a common future. Years continued to pass in this rich tapestry of daily life. Lucy grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's compassion and her father's steady nature. At 18, she began courting a young rancher from a neighboring property, and her wedding in 1891 was one of the biggest celebrations Carlin had ever seen. Daniel followed his interest in numbers to become a clerk at the bank in town, though he still came home every weekend to help on the ranch. William discovered a talent for drawing and painting, documenting life on the ranch in sketches and watercolors that people began commissioning. Grace married Dr. Patterson's assistant, a good man who loved her and Hope without reservation, though they continued to live on the ranch in a small house Thomas built for them on the property. Hope grew into a bright, happy child who called Thomas and Penelope Grandma and Grandpa and knew nothing but love. In the spring of 1892, 10 years after Penelope had stepped off that dusty stagecoach, she and Thomas stood on the porch of their now much expanded home, watching their family gather for Sunday dinner. Lucy was there with her husband and her own baby, Thomas and Penelope's first grandchild. Daniel had brought a young woman he was courting. William was showing Hope how to draw horses. Grace and her husband were helping set up tables outside because the house, even enlarged, could not hold everyone comfortably. 10 years, Penelope said softly. Can you believe it has been 10 years? Best decade of my life. Thomas wrapped an arm around her waist, though I think the next 10 will be even better. Growing old together, Penelope leaned into him. Watching our family expand, more grandchildren, all of that and more. He kissed her temple. Every morning I wake up grateful that you took a chance on a lonely rancher's letters. I am grateful you took a chance on a broken woman who thought she had nothing to offer. You were never broken, Thomas said firmly. You were finding your path, and thank God it led to my door. As their family gathered for the meal, the noise and chaos and love washing over them, Penelope thought back to that terrifying moment in the kitchen, confessing her secret, certain she would be rejected. Thomas's response had changed everything, had opened a door to a life richer than anything she could have imagined. They had filled their house with love, just as Thomas had promised. Not in the conventional way, not through children of their blood, but through choice and compassion and commitment. Every child they had taken in, every person they had helped, every kindness they had extended had added to the foundation of love they built together. The ranch continued to prosper, providing not just for the immediate family, but for the small community of people who had come to depend on the Northwoods' generosity and steady presence. They had become pillars of the community, known for their fairness in business and their willingness to help neighbors in need. As the sun set over the Nevada mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Thomas raised his glass. "A toast," he announced, and everyone quieted. "To family, however we define it, to love that chooses rather than demands, and to my remarkable wife, who taught me that the best things in life are the ones we build together." "To family," everyone echoed, raising their own glasses. Penelope looked around at the faces of the people she loved, at the life she and Thomas had created from nothing but determination and faith in each other. She thought about the young woman who had arrived here so broken and afraid, and the woman she had become, strong and confident and surrounded by love. "To second chances," she added quietly, meeting Thomas's eyes, "and to the cowboy who saw past my failures to the possibilities." That night, after everyone had left and the house was finally quiet, Penelope and Thomas walked down to the creek, their evening ritual even after all these years. The cottonwoods rustled overhead, and the water burbled over stones, constants in a world of change. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had sent you back?" Thomas asked. "If I had reacted differently to your confession?" "Sometimes," Penelope admitted. "Though I try not to dwell on roads not taken." "Why do you ask?" "Because I want you to know that it never crossed my mind, not for a second. From the moment I met you, I knew you were exactly who I had been waiting for, even if I had not known to wait for you specifically. Your courage in telling me the truth only confirmed it. I thought I was being honest because I had to be, because it was the right thing to do. But looking back, I think part of me hoped you would be the man your letters suggested, someone who could see beyond convention to what really mattered. We both took a leap of faith that day. Thomas pulled her close, and we have been catching each other ever since. They stood there under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first awkward conversation, their wedding, every triumph and challenge of the past decade. The land around them was theirs now, not just legally but in a deeper sense, shaped by their work and dreams, watered by their tears and laughter. "I love you, Thomas Northwood," Penelope said. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself." "I love you too, Penelope. Thank you for teaching me what love really means." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of her first marriage, the shame of divorce, the desperate gamble of responding to a stranger's advertisement, all of it had led to this moment, this life, this love. She thought about the young women who might someday face similar choices, who might feel broken or less than because they could not conform to society's narrow definitions of worth. She hoped they would find their own Thomas, their own second chance, their own path to understanding that there are many ways to build a meaningful life. The house welcomed them back, warm and bright with lamplight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. But tonight, they were simply a husband and wife, grateful for the life they had built, for the family they had created, for the love that had grown from an honest conversation and a generous heart. In the bedroom they had shared for nearly a decade, Penelope undressed slowly, watching Thomas do the same. Their bodies were older now, marked by years of hard work and the passage of time, but also familiar and dear, maps of their shared history. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, catching her watching him. "That I am the luckiest woman alive." She went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "That every choice I made, good and bad, led me to you. That I would not change a single moment if it meant losing this." He held her tight, his cheek pressed against her hair. "We have built something remarkable, you and I. Not just the ranch or the family, but this partnership, this love that keeps growing deeper every year." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Penelope felt completely at peace. "You remember what you said that first day," she murmured sleepily. "When I told you I was barren. I said we would fill this house with love. We did." She smiled against his chest. "We really did." "We did," Thomas agreed. "And we are not done yet. There is still more love to give, more lives to touch, more family to build, always," Penelope whispered. "As long as we are together, there is always more love to give." And it was true. In the years that followed, the Northwood Ranch continued to be a haven for those who needed it. More children came through their doors, some staying temporarily, others becoming permanent parts of the family. The community around them grew and prospered, always knowing they could count on Thomas and Penelope Northwood for help, guidance, or simply a friendly ear. Their grandchildren multiplied, filling the house with noise and joy during holidays and visits. Lucy had 4 children of her own, each one learning to ride before they could properly walk. Daniel eventually married and had twins, bookish children who loved spending time in Grandpa Thomas's library. William became a renowned artist, his paintings of ranch life selling across the country. But he never forgot his roots, returning home often with his own growing family. Grace's medical training made her invaluable to the community, delivering babies and tending the sick alongside Dr. Patterson. Hope grew up to become a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property where children from surrounding homesteads could get an education without traveling to distant towns. As Thomas and Penelope aged, their children and grandchildren took over more of the ranch work, but the two of them remained the heart of the family, the steady center around which everyone else orbited. Their love story became legendary in the area, proof that families built on choice could be just as strong as those built on blood. In the spring of 1912, 30 years after Penelope's arrival, they celebrated their anniversary with a gathering that drew people from 3 counties. The house and grounds overflowed with family and friends, all wanting to honor the couple who had touched so many lives. Standing before the crowd, white-haired but still straight-backed and strong, Thomas took Penelope's hand. 30 years ago, a frightened young woman stepped off a stagecoach and changed my life forever. She thought she had failed, that she had nothing to offer. But she gave me everything that matters: love, partnership, family, and a life filled with purpose. Penelope squeezed his hand, tears running down her weathered cheeks. And a lonely cowboy took a broken woman and showed her she was never broken at all, just waiting to find where she belonged. He taught me that love is not about meeting expectations, but about creating possibilities. Their family surrounded them. 4 generations gathered to celebrate a love that had started with honesty and grown through commitment. Children played in the yard where Penelope had once planted her first hesitant garden. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house that had once been so empty and quiet. That night, after everyone had left or settled down to sleep in various rooms and outbuildings, Thomas and Penelope walked their familiar path to the creek. The cottonwoods had grown massive over the decades, providing deep shade in summer. The creek still bubbled over the same stones, constant and eternal. 30 years, Penelope marveled. More than half my life spent here with you. The best half, Thomas said, for both of us. Do you think we made the right choice? It was a question she had never asked before, never needed to ask. Taking in all those children, building this unconventional family, Thomas turned to her, taking both her hands in his. Penelope, my love, we made the only choice our hearts would allow. Every child we helped, every person we took in, every act of love and kindness, that is what life is for. That is what makes it all worthwhile. I know. She smiled up at him, this man who had been her salvation and her partner, her love and her best friend. I just wanted to hear you say it one more time. They stood there under the vast Nevada sky, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had built, and Penelope felt complete. The fear and shame that had driven her west so many years ago were distant memories now, transformed by love into strength and purpose. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you, Thomas replied, pulling her close, for your courage, your compassion, your unwavering love. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They stayed by the creek until the stars emerged, those same impossible stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story. And when they finally walked back to the house, moving slowly with the careful steps of age, they did so hand in hand, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a life well lived and love well given. The Northwood Ranch would continue for generations, each one adding to the legacy of love that Thomas and Penelope had established. Their story would be told and retold, passed down as proof that the strongest families are built on choice and compassion, that love is not diminished by being shared widely but multiplied infinitely. And at the heart of it all, always, was that first honest conversation, that moment of vulnerability and acceptance, and a cowboy's simple promise. Then we will fill this house with love. A promise kept faithfully for a lifetime and beyond.